Good afternoon to all of you. On the auspicious occasion of National Doctors' Day, 1st of July, the date of the birth and death anniversary of late Bidhan Chandra Rai, who was a doctor, not only a doctor, but the ex-Chief Minister of West Bengal. And I pay my homage to all the doctors and all the nursing staff and all the healthcare workers who are fighting this COVID pandemic since last 1.5 years. We have lost many lives and there are many COVID martyrs amongst us. So this is a day to pledge to work well and also to so that we can work in so that the lives are not lost, and we should take care of ourselves and pay our homage to all those souls who have left us fighting this deadly pandemic. So I'm starting my topic today. I thank Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine for giving me this opportunity to talk on this particular topic today. Are my slides visible?
You need to start sharing screen.
No, it's not visible yet, no? Okay, 1 minute. No. Now?
So can you put it on full screen? Slideshow. Yes, sir. Now
It's visible now.
Yes.
Okay. So without wasting any more time, let's start. Today, my topic is regarding nursing the acute coronary syndrome patients. To introduce myself, I am a consultant physician who also works in the intensive care unit, and I am the chairman of ISCCM Shiliguri. It's in the district Darjeeling, West Bengal. So the topic is regarding acute coronary syndrome patients, the nursing. So what is acute coronary syndrome? In short, it's called ACS. ACS is a common life-threatening condition, and in our aging population, its incidence is likely to rise. The treatment aims to ease the symptoms like chest pain, discomfort and all, and to improve the coronary artery blood flow and thereby prevent complications. And the immediate management combined with cardiac rehabilitation and secondary prevention can improve outcome and also the quality of life of the patients. So acute coronary syndrome includes mainly myocardial infarction, which is commonly called heart attack, is the irreversible necrosis of heart muscles secondary to prolonged ischemia. And it results from an imbalance between the oxygen supply and demand of the heart. Most often, this is caused by some rupture of plaque with thrombus formation, which blocks the coronary artery and which results in an acute reduction in blood supply to that particular part of the heart, that particular myocardium. And majority of all acute MI are secondary to thrombus formation. And when thrombus develops, the perfusion to the myocardium, which is distal to the occlusion, is halted, resulting in necrosis. But we should know that this acute myocardial infarction process, it takes some time. The cardiac cells can withstand ischemic conditions when there is less blood supply up till say 20 minutes before the cellular death of the myocardium starts. And the earliest tissue to become the ischemic is the subendocardium, which is the innermost layer of the tissue of the cardiac muscle. If ischemia persists, it takes approximately 4 to 6 hours for the entire thickness of the heart muscle to become necrosed. So as early as we can start treatment is better, because when the cellular death begins, it's an irreversible process. So as early as possible we detect, we'll treat early, and there will be less chances of damage to the myocardium. So in this diagram, you can see this area of the heart. This is a post-mortem picture of a cross-section of the heart. This is the area of necrosis. See, the blood supply was not there, and it caused permanent damage to the cardiac muscle, leading to the death of the patient. So this picture also shows, the heart has all these valves, and the main arteries are sometimes blocked, and this blockage in the blood flow leads to, and this is called atheroma, which is atherosclerotic plaques lining the coronary artery. And when it is fully stopped, the blood supply is fully stopped, it causes infarction, and there are ECG changes of ST elevation. And ischemic changes are also visible, like T inversion and ST depression. So this is important because we should be aware that this cardiac condition of acute coronary syndrome needs to be treated immediately. So timely recognition of ACS is necessary. Why? To have immediate management, which is crucial to reduce the risk of mortality and prevent further cardiac damage. Nurses have a crucial role in early recognition, as well as administering early and prompt treatment and helping patients to understand the condition and taking their care. So this is our topic of discussion today. So whenever an ACS is suspected, the symptom may vary. I will discuss the important symptoms. We need an immediate 12-lead ECG. Whether if there is ST elevation, we proceed to the treatment of ST elevation MI. If there is no ST elevation, but other ECG changes are there, we get the blood test for the enzymes done. And it can be either non-ST elevation MI or unstable angina. If the troponin test is positive, it's non-ST elevation MI. If the troponin test is negative, it is an unstable angina. So nurses have a crucial role by helping the patients to understand their condition, caring for them, and definitely to promote secondary prevention to prevent further damage after as and when we are treating the ACS, the acute coronary event. Nurses have a key role in facilitating and administering the prompt treatment, recognition of deterioration, because while during the treatment, those few days, the chances of deterioration of the patient is there. So we have to keep on monitoring the patients, and here the nurses play a huge role to provide holistic care and also to provide psychosocial support. That is very important because the nursing staffs are in constant touch with the patients and they need psychosocial support, and that is important. And encouraging the patients to engage in healthy secondary prevention behaviors, which I'll discuss. Grossly, we can say that infarction, the macular infarction, is based on the location of the damage. Suppose it is in the anterior wall, it's called anterior infarction. If it is in the inferior wall, it's called inferior infarction. If it is the lateral wall, it's called lateral wall myocardial infarction. Similarly, as I said, there are two types of MI, that is the ST elevation MI in the ECG or the ST non-ST elevation MI. An acute coronary syndrome not only involves the ST elevation MI and non-ST elevation MI, it also involves the angina, whether it is stable, unstable, or variant angina. So what are the risk factors for a patient to suffer from acute coronary syndrome? Usually the modifiable risk factors are hyperlipidemia, that is high bad cholesterol, that is the LDL is increased, the HDL is low, the good cholesterol, and sometimes triglycerides are also increased. High blood pressure if it is uncontrolled or not treated, history of tobacco use and smoking, sedentary lifestyle, obesity, uncontrolled diabetes, and very much important is some lifestyle changes may be needed regarding their diet. So what are the non-modifiable risk factors which you can't modify? The age of the patient, the sex of the patient, the ethnicity, if there is strong family history, if there is some genetic predisposition, and for females, usually they have some protection before menopause. After menopause, the risk of cardiac death increases. So what are the common symptoms of angina? The patients will come with palpitations. The chest pain can be like heaviness, can be burning, it can be squeezing type of chest pain. And there can be exertional dyspnea, means the patient will have shortness of breath while exercising or walking or even at rest. Diaphoresis, perspiration will be there, and also nausea can be the important symptom. So chest pain is frequently described as a pressure type of sensation and can occur even with rest in patients with ACS. And ischemic chest pain can radiate down the arms, to the neck, to the jaws. So any chest pain which is radiating to the neck, to the jaws, and also to the left arm, we usually think of it as an ischemic chest pain. Along with, as I said, sweating, profuse sweating can be there, shortness of breath or dyspnea can be there, nausea, abdominal pain, and sometimes syncope can occur. Importantly, any new onset or increased exertional dyspnea is the most common anginal equivalent. If there is no chest pain, don't say that it can be a myocardial infarction. The chest pain can be, even in absence of chest pain, a new onset of or increased in the exertional dyspnea can be an anginal equivalent. And very importantly, fear of impending doom can be another thing, like patient becomes panicky and there is a chance of psychological breakdown. So what is the suspicion? When do you suspect that the patient having a chest pain caused by ACS? Usually older person, mainly male sex, they have more chance of having an acute coronary syndrome if there is positive family history. And also if there is associated diabetes mellitus, kidney diseases, prior history of myocardial infarction, prior history of ischemic heart disease needing coronary revascularization, or even peripheral arterial diseases, they all have higher risk of acute coronary syndrome. Nurses must also recognize the atypical symptoms. See, all the symptoms may not be typical of chest pain, breathlessness, radiation to jaw and neck and all these. It can be pain abdomen, upper abdomen, like the epigastric pain. There can be symptoms of indigestion. It can be a stabbing pain or increasing dyspnea in the absence of any chest pain. That is important. Even if there is no chest pain, a patient can have acute coronary syndrome. This one you must keep in mind. And atypical presentations usually occur in female patients, in older patients of more than 75 years, and in patients with dementia who forget everything, most of the things, and also diabetic patients and kidney disease patients. So how do you assess and how to diagnose? That is very important. As I said, the first thing is the history. History has been taken about the presenting symptoms and also if there is previous history, family history, as I mentioned. Now next, and the first investigation is the ECG. The electrocardiogram leads us to know whether their patient is having an acute MI. So it should be obtained at the earliest. Whenever a patient is presenting at the emergency room of our hospital, it should be obtained within the first 10 minutes from the patient reports a chest pain. Very important, because as early as possible, if we get an ECG done and if we can pick it up early, we can treat them very early and it can be helpful. It can be, as I said, ST elevation. It can be ST depression. Sometimes a prolonged ischemia of some duration, then can be Q waves can be seen. And very importantly, we should send the cardiac enzymes. The CPK-MB is a very important cardiac enzyme in the cardiac muscles, and it is elevated within the 4 to 8 hours. It peaks in 12 to 20 hours and returns to normal within 48 to 72 hours. So it's the earliest to peak. Similarly, troponin T and troponin I, the levels are elevated at 4 to 6 hours. They peak at 14 to 18 hours and return to baseline over 6 to 7 days. So it peaks a bit later, but also it returns to baseline after 7 days. But CPK-MB returns to normal within 72 hours. And it peaks a bit earlier than troponin. So these enzymes have increased specificity for necrosis and are therefore very useful in diagnosing postoperative MI, like when CPK-MB may be elevated related to skeletal trauma. Myoglobin is another thing, LDH is another thing. Now, we also should go for arterial blood gases and pulse oximetry. Pulse oximetry will let us know whether the hypoxia has already set in or not, and the arterial blood gas may show some abnormalities in the form of hypoxia. Regarding complete blood count, when we are sending it, the WBC can be raised. It can appear to be raised after second day after MI because of the inflammatory process. It may not be due to infection always, but we should always rule out infection if the WBC is raised more than 10,000. ESR rises on the second or third day, indicating an inflammatory response. Now we should also send the renal function test, the liver function test, and electrolytes. Among the liver function test, I will tell you the enzyme called SGOT rises in case of acute myocardial infarction. So the whole LFT is normal, only the SGOT is raised. That can signify cardiac damage. The renal function test also these includes the sodium potassium, because the imbalances of sodium and potassium can alter conduction and compromise the contractility. And the lipids profile can be sent, or it doesn't help in the acute setting, but if that is very highly elevated, then it can reflect that there is already arteriosclerosis as a cause of for coronary narrowing or spasm. To determine, and very importantly, if there is chance of high dyslipidemia, we'll think of already existing atherosclerotic process. Echocardiogram is used to determine the dimensions of chambers, septal ventricular wall motion, ejection fraction, that is how much the blood is being pumped from the left ventricle, and the configuration and the function of the valves. So echocardiography is also an important investigation, so that we can know whether SCS, how to deal with an acute coronary syndrome patients. Chest X-ray can be normal, or show an enlarged cardiac shadow suggestive of heart failure or ventricular aneurysm. And very importantly, coronary angiography is used to visualize the narrowing or occlusion of the coronary arteries, and is usually done in conjunction with measurements of chamber pressures and assessment of left ventricular function. So these are the investigations which let us know that whether the acute coronary syndrome has occurred or not. So what is the goal of our medical management? We should be prompt so that we can minimize the myocardial damage, and also preserve the myocardial function and prevent the complications. Because not only we treat, we also try to prevent the complications, and definitely to try to prevent death. So this is a mnemonic, Monatas, which has been developed somewhat in the West for the nurses. Morphine is used as M is for morphine as an analgesic drug. Morphine reduces the pain and anxiety, also has other beneficial effects as a vasodilator and decreases the workload. And if there is heart failure also, it helps. Oxygen should be provided, because usually when there is acute coronary syndrome, the blood supply to the myocardium is decreased, and therefore the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood, the oxygen requirement is high, but the oxygen supply is not enough. And this oxygen supply can be given by a nasal cannula at 2 to 4 ml per minute, 4 liter per minute. Nitroglycerin is the first line of treatment for angina and acute MI. It causes vasodilatation and it increases the blood flow to the myocardium. Usually patients come with sorbitrate tablet under the tongue, and all this can be given immediately. And also there are some precautions I will describe. Aspirin prevents the formation of the thromboxane A2, and it is the most important drug of choice because it causes the platelets to aggregate and arteries to constrict, usually the thromboxane A2. And this can be prevented. And the earlier the patient receives an aspirin after symptom onset, the greater is the potential benefit. Now, where the facility of a PCI is not there, percutaneous intervention is not there, usually in the peripheries, thrombolytics are used for ST elevation MI. Thrombolytics are used to dissolve the thrombus in a coronary artery, and they can be given. In the earlier days, streptokinase was available, is available till date, and nowadays the newer molecules are also available. These are allowed, these are used to minimize the size of the infarction and preserve the ventricular function, given in some patients with MI. Anticoagulations like heparin should be given to prevent clots from becoming larger and block coronary arteries. They are usually given with other anti-clotting medicines to prevent further or reduce heart muscle damage. Very importantly, we should know that the patient should not be tensed and they should not have constipation, because if the patient is constipated, what will happen? They will exert, and that will cause more chest discomfort because of the exertion. So we should give stool softeners like laxatives, like milk of magnesia or lactulose and all those things which you usually give, because that is also important, because if the patient strains during defecation, it can trigger arrhythmia and another cardiac arrest. Sedatives like anxiolytics, in order to limit the size of infarction, maybe because it needs to be given to give rest to the patient. Diazepam or clonazepam or alprazolam are nowadays being prescribed so that the patients are sedated. So this is a small mnemonic: Monatas, morphine, oxygen, nitroglycerin, aspirin, and other blood antiplatelets like clopidogrel and all newer molecules, thrombolytics, anticoagulants, stool softeners, and sedatives. So this is in short, the treatment we should start. Thrombolytics are like streptokinase are usually administered IV. The purpose of thrombolytics is to dissolve the thrombus in a coronary artery, allowing blood to flow easily through the coronary artery, so that when the blockage is open, it is called reperfusion, means the perfusion was hampered and the blockage has been opened, and thereby minimizing the size of the infarction and preserving the ventricular function. But very importantly, to be effective, it should be used as early as possible, because if we delay, as I said, time is muscle over here in heart, the myocardium gets lost and gets damaged, and it is permanent damage. So as early as possible within 3 to 6 hours, we should use thrombolytics when indicated. But we should be careful. There are some indications where contraindications, like if there is history of bleeding or any active bleeding site is there on any bleeding disorders, we can't use this thrombolytics. Like in history of any hemorrhagic stroke, if there is an tremor in the brain, if there is an active internal bleeding like peptic ulcer bleeding and all, if there is severe hypertension that's more than 200 of systolic, because when we are using thrombolytic therapy with such high blood pressure, there can be hemorrhage. Recent history of any head injury or current use of anticoagulants, these are the contraindications when we should be careful or we should not use thrombolytics. Analgesics are very important to reduce the chest pain. And very importantly, wherever the facilities are there in bigger setups, the PTCA and if needed, CABG are planned. Now, nursing management for a patient with acute MI will involve achieving a balance between myocardial oxygen supply and demand, as I said. They are achieved by oxygen administration. We should try to prevent the complications, which I will discuss in the later part of my talk. There should be continuous monitoring of cardiac functions like the blood pressure, heart rate. Continuous regular routine ECG monitoring is very important, hemodynamic monitoring, and also we should monitor and record the intake of the intake and the urine output, because this balance is also very important. And to provide emotional and psychological support is another parameter which are taken care of by our nursing staffs. They explain and provide adequate information and knowledge about disease condition and treatment process. The nursing management involved in MI is critical. Definitely, it should be systematic and efficiency is needed to implement the care of a patient with MI. So efficiency is very much important. And what our mind does not know, our eyes cannot see. So if we don't know when and what is the problem, then we can't treat. So we should always be up to date in our management, particularly in these critically ill patients who are having acute coronary syndrome. Nurses should assess for chest pain, which are not relieved by rest or medication. Vitals like blood pressure and pulse should be regularly monitored. We should assess the presence of whether shortness of breath is there, dyspnea, tachypnea, whether the respiratory rate is increasing, and presence of chest crepitations in chest. And we should also assess for nausea and vomiting. And we should be careful if there is decrease in urinary output. So hourly urinary output monitoring is good in critically ill patients. And assess the history of illnesses. We should perform a precise and complete physical assessment to detect complications and changes in the patient status. And the intravenous sites should be frequently assessed, wherever the intravenous line, whether there is thrombophlebitis is gone, whether we need to change the IV sites. We should know and we should take care that these new complications like nosocomial infections also should not take place. So relief of pain or ischemic signs and symptoms should be our focus. Prevention of myocardial damage has already been discussed. Absence of respiratory dysfunction like shortness of breath, like if a patient develop heart failure of any arrhythmia, there will be respiratory distress. Maintenance of adequate tissue perfusion, and foremost is also important is reduction in the anxiety level of the patient. So to establish a plan of care, the focus should also be on the absence of the early detection of complications, if any. Because we are treating a patient, we have taken care of the acute coronary syndrome very well, then the complications occur, then we may lose the patient. So we should always be careful that the complications doesn't occur, and if it occurs, it should be noted early so that we can take care of that treatment and we can treat it. So whenever the chest pain is controlled, the heart rate is stable, we should know that the patient is improving. Achievement of the activity level sufficient for basic care is important. So plan in place to meet the needs after discharge, because the disease process, the treatment plan and the prognosis should be understood. If the patient is recovering well, we have to plan to meet the needs after the patient is discharged from the hospital. So the general priorities for patients with acute coronary syndrome are hemodynamic monitoring, which is very important. And as I mentioned, the close observation of the vital signs. A review of the fluid status can provide information about the renal perfusion, intake output, as I mentioned, as some patients may present with or even develop heart failure during the treatment. So fluid overload should not be there. In patients with diabetes, we have to take care of the glucose serum, the blood glucose levels, not only from the lab. We do capillary blood glucose, CBGs, every frequently. If the patient has high blood glucose, like more than 200, we can start with an IV insulin drip. by infusion pump. Patients recently diagnosed with diabetes should be referred to diabetes specialist nurse. Now, usually diabetics should be very carefully managed because the insulin requirement varies during the stressful situation, and some patients who are not previously diabetic can develop hyperglycemia even during that acute coronary syndrome stage due to stress. This is called stress hyperglycemia. In those patients, the blood sugar level will be high, but definitely if we get the HbA1c done, it will be normal or below normal because the patient was not previously a diabetic. If the HbA1c is high, then you will know that at least in the last 3 to 4 months, the patient was having high diabetes. So if the patient doesn't know of any history of diabetes, a patient is presenting with hyperglycemia, CBG of 200 or 180 or 300, we should take care that it can be a new onset diabetes also. So symptom monitoring is important to achieve pain relief with nitroglycerin or morphine. Swift recognition of any cardiac changes on the serial ECGs. We have to compare the ECGs. If there is any gross changes, that also is a part of the nursing care. You should immediately inform the treating doctor. The patients considered high risk should be managed where continuous cardiac monitoring is available as they are at risk for arrhythmias. Because continuous cardiac monitoring is very important in the initial few days because more chances of arrhythmias, rhythm disturbances like VT, VF can also occur, which can be fatal. Patients at intermediate risk may be managed in the medical assessment unit where they are likely to receive serial ECGs. When monitoring is not possible, serial ECGs may help. Nurses caring for patients with ACS should have ECG interpretation skills. Nurses should know the basics of ACS because ECG should be read by the nursing staff also. As the ECG changes or arrhythmias are signs of potential deterioration, so the reading of ECG is very important. The ECG interpretation is important and immediately the doctor should be consulted. Ongoing management of IV cannulas, central blood pressure lines if needed, the urinary catheters, if there is any other wound and dressings, the patient should not be anxious. They should be calmed down. Nurses should be calm and reassuring. They should ensure pain and other symptoms are well controlled. They play a central role in providing psychosocial support because you are with on the patient's bedside for 6 to 8 hours daily or even 12 hours in some places. So that psychosocial support the patients are getting from you. So you should be more careful. The nurses should give patients a chance to speak about their experiences, address their concerns. We should talk with the sisters and the brothers should be talking to them, and we should try to know their experiences. Any concerns are there, we can use it as a communication, and this communication will help us to allay their fears, anxieties, and their problems. So another important thing is keeping clear and comprehensive notes, which is crucial to ensure all nurses caring for patients with ACS know the patient's clinical status, areas of concern and management plans. And nurses caring for patients who recently had coronary angiography should monitor radial or femoral access because if the coronary angiography is done through the radial route or the radial artery or the femoral artery, there should not be any complications. The nursing care should be important over there also so that there is no complications like any problem with the radial route or the femoral access sites. And if we can recognize those complications early, we can take care. So close communication with cardiac catheterizations, laboratory staff and coronary care unit is crucial. Nurses receiving these patients need clear information about the type of procedure they had, whether the coronary access was or the angiography access was done by the femoral or the radial route. Any complications were there, if their medications or IV fluids were used at the cardiac catheterization theater, and whether they have received anticoagulants and which will put them at greater risk of bleeding. The development of chest pain specialist and ACS specialist nurse roles have improved the care of ACS patients, particularly in those with non-ST elevation MI, and these nurses can perform acute triage assessments and facilitate early access to specialist services and cardiology. So in the critical care unit, particularly those dealing with ACS patients, specialist nurses should be more careful and they can be deployed. So the priorities are again to relieve the pain and anxiety of the patient, to reduce the myocardial workload, to prevent and detect and assist in early treatment of life-threatening arrhythmias. Like as I said, it can be bradyarrhythmias, it can cause cardiac arrest, it can be VT, VF or AF, also new onset, and promotion of cardiac health and self-care. So administration of oxygen along with medication therapy to assist the relief of symptoms is important. Bed rest and backrest should be elevated to help decrease the chest discomfort and dyspnea. We should try to keep unless the patient is having hypotension, we should ask the patient to be at 30 to 45 degree backrest should be given. We can encourage the changing of positions frequently to help keep fluid from pooling in the bases of the lungs. And skin temperature and peripheral pulses are frequently monitored to monitor the tissue perfusion. Monitor the patient closely for changes in cardiac rate and rhythm, blood pressure, respiratory status. It should be done regularly, the urinary output, changes in skin color, and the laboratory values. So after implementation of the intervention, within the time specialist nurse should check if the myocardial damage is prevented, if there is absence of respiratory dysfunction or ischemic signs and symptoms. Adequate tissue perfusion should be tried to maintain. So always we should be having the ongoing assessment every hourly regarding the airway, breathing, circulation, the basics, the vital signs, the cardiac, the blood, including blood pressure, heart rate, and also the pulse oximeter can show the oxygen saturation level. Cardiac monitoring, the rhythm should be analyzed. There should not be dysrhythmia or arrhythmia. Laboratory studies should be monitored, and definitely my medications should be used as per advice, and it can be titrated according to the patient's need. My last part of my talk is regarding the complications which we should try to prevent. Usually dysrhythmias, that is arrhythmias, are the most common complication, and that can be fatal. Acute pulmonary edema, from heart failure, cardiogenic shock, papillary muscle dysfunction, pericarditis, and cardiac tamponade are some of the complications. Another important thing is when you are dealing with myocardial infarction, we should know about the right ventricular infarction. Usually in myocardial infarction, as I said, anterior MI, they usually have the left ventricle is involved. But right ventricular involvement with the right coronary artery is occluded. There is something a bit different. Sometimes we need to, when we do the ECG, you have to take the right-sided chest leads. Because in this patient, there is more chance of hypotension. And in these patients, we should try to avoid nitroglycerin in the form of sorbitrate or monotrate and all these medications. Because if there is right ventricular infarction, there is more chance of hypotension. And in these patients, usually in left ventricular failure, we have to avoid fluid. We have to keep the patient a bit dehydrated. But if there is right ventricular involvement, sometimes we may need to give IV fluids to these cardiac compromised patients in myocardial infarction involving the right ventricle. What are the signs of left-sided heart failure? More or less the LVF, we say, left ventricular failure. Usually it's weakness, fatigue, dyspnea, sometimes hacking, cough, and sometimes if it is more, there is chance of frothy pink thin sputum which comes out when you cough. These are the clinical assessment, like the tachycardia will be there, and restless and confusion will increase, and ST-S4 will be audible. Similarly, the right heart failure, the right side heart failure, if it is present, it is usually due to the left side failure, and it causes back pressure. If the left ventricle is not functioning, it will cause back pressure on the left atrium. Again, it will be on the pulmonary circulation, the venous circulation, and also the right atrium. So this is usually caused by left-sided failure, and there is pulmonary circulation is ended. Like the heart failure, the right-sided heart failure will have dependent bilateral edema. Usually it can be GI, gastrointestinal bloating, liver can be enlarged, and there will be fatigue and weight gain. The fluid retention will be there. So assessment of heart failure patients, the patients who are developing heart failure following an MI, airway, breathing, circulation, the vital signs, the ECG. And in these cases, if the right side of the heart is also involved, there will be, we should assess the distended neck veins and the peripheral edema in the legs, and also in the, if the patient is lying with the back, that is over the sacrum. So the past medical history, physical assessment. After that, nowadays we have in our hand that test called NT-proBNP. This BNP is released in response to the ventricular wall stretch, and if the BNP levels are high, we can suspect it as a heart failure. Chest X-ray is also important because the cardiac size is increased, and usually the X-ray picture shows pulmonary edema type picture, bat wing appearance and all. And echocardiography is very much important at that point of time, because that will say usually the heart failure is associated with low ejection fraction during that particular period of acute coronary syndrome. So we should have the back of the bed raised. We should apply oxygen, obtain IV access. We have to give injectable diuretics like intravenous furosemide or torsemide, like Lasix we use commonly. AC inhibitors should be prescribed judiciously. and we should have strict monitoring of input and output. In cases of cardiac failure, you have to give output should be more than input. And definitely, because we are using diuretics like furosemide or torsemide, we should be keeping in mind the electrolyte disturbance can occur, and we should have our sodium potassium levels regularly done so that we can pick up hyponatremia or hypokalemia and we can treat accordingly. The ACE inhibitors, nitrates, diuretics, and definitely sometimes if the blood pressure is low, we can't use these nitrates and ACE inhibitors, then we have to use the positive inotropic support like dobutamine. An acute life-threatening event is the pulmonary edema. When the left ventricular failure is there, usually due to left ventricular failure, there happen to be an acute life-threatening event that is called acute pulmonary edema. And this cardiogenic pulmonary edema is due to the left ventricular pumping failure. Fluid fills the lungs, the alveolar space, and as I said, sometimes the coughing will show, and this coughing will lead to pink frothy sputum being expectorated. So the severe dyspnea, diaphoresis, hypertension, tachycardia, anxiety, tachypnea, and pink frothy sputum are the important side. Here also the same treatment is with diuretics and bronchodilators and also airway management. Sometimes may need mechanical ventilation, intubation and ventilation also. So the complications of myocardial infarction include not only heart failure, it can be myocardial rupture. The heart muscles can rupture, that can be fatal. The ventricular septum can be damaged, then it will cause ventricular septal defect. Valves can be damaged, like mitral regurgitation can occur, cardiac arrhythmias, and acute pericarditis. So myocardial rupture and aneurysmal dilatation is very important because it can be catastrophic and fatal. Ventricular septal defect also will need emergency surgical repair of the ventricular septum. Mitral regurgitation usually occurs from the rupture of the papillary muscles, and here also emergency surgery should be taken. So if we can take care and if we can detect them early, we can treat the patient well. Now the last complication I want to discuss is the cardiac arrhythmias. It is usually the ventricular tachycardia and ventricular fibrillation. VF is the most common cause of death after MI in the first 24 hours because if ventricular fibrillation cannot be treated immediately, it causes death. Hemodynamically unstable VT and VF should be treated with DC shock. You all know that you always keep the DC shock handy because it can be needed in any cardiac ACS patient. Hemodynamically stable VT should be treated with IV beta blocker, lidocaine, and other medications. Atrial fibrillation is common after a myocardial infarction and can be treated with beta blockers and digoxin. Amiodarone can be used daily to prevent the recurrence of atrial fibrillation. Another thing is bradyarrhythmias, that is the slowing of heart rate. It is due to sinus node dysfunction, and this atrioventricular block may occur during acute MI, particularly if there is chance of inferior valve MI. In inferior valve MI cases, usually AV block occur. The heart block with hemodynamic compromise will require an immediate atropine injection. Atropines can help, and also a temporary pacing can be needed. And also another complication is pericarditis. It occurs when there is large transmural infarctions, and pericarditis usually can be treated with aspirin. It causes pain, and pericarditis which develops after some time after MI may represent Dessler syndrome, which is immune mediated. So again, to finally summarize, the ABCs should be monitored, the vital signs should be recorded, oxygenation should be assessed and given, oxygen should be given as per need. Serial ECGs and the ECG monitoring in the cardiac monitor are both important. Measurement of urine output and the mental status is important. So finally, we will need, when a patient is getting better, we'll need cardiac rehabilitation. It's a comprehensive long-term program that involves periodic evaluation, prescribed exercise and education, and counseling about the risk factors modification. So what are the risk factors? We should give importance because prior to discharge, it is also the sisters, the doctors all should emphasize smoking cessation, increase in physical activity later on, having a better lifestyle modification, reduction in the daily salt intake. If there is already hypertension or diabetes, this should be well controlled. Cholesterol, the bad cholesterol should be controlled, that is lipids should be managed well. And symptom control is also important with medication. And finally, again, the psychological well-being and stress management should be done. Thank you all for your patient hearing. Dr. Tapas sir, I welcome you, sir. I couldn't listen to you at the beginning. Now, please say something, and my topic is open for discussions.
Very nice presentation, sent.
Thank you, sir.
We have found out everything. Our discussion is only the duty of the nurses, paramedics, and the emergency doctor who is on duty in the emergency. So recently there is one study in UK. In every minute, 33 patients of acute coronary syndrome is coming to the emergency. And if you give the proper management initially by the sisters and paramedics or emergency doctor, the mortality rate can be reduced at least 20%. So as you have pointed out everything, that duty of the nurses is to assess the patient, what is the character of the pain, whether it's the true acute coronary syndrome or it's a false pain, that can be detected by your history, that can be detected by your investigations or by ECG, then you treat it accordingly as you mentioned in your lectures. So main thing is the assessment and then management. This is the main thing. Okay, any question to Dr. N? The audience?
So there is a question put in the chat box, sir.
Yeah, I have seen just now. Yes, one is there any fluid formula for macular infarction based on ejection fraction? Definitely, if there is ejection fraction is low, there is difficult. IV fluid should not be given because there is more chance of acute heart failure. And if there is already patient is already in acute heart failure or congestive cardiac failure, IV fluid should not be given. Oral intake should be continued, and if needed, it can be increased. But any particular formula, sir, Dr. Tapas sir, can you say whether there is any particular fluid formula for MI patients based on ejection fraction? We have to assess clinically, no? But definitely, if we try to give fluids in these patients, there will be more adverse consequences. And usually in right ventricular infarction, fluids can help when there is hypotension and which is not being managed well with the normal supportive measures. So any comment from Tapas sir?
Sorry, I can't follow you.
Any comment regarding fluid, IV fluids in low ejection fraction patient?
At least it depends on the urinary output. If there is hypotension, then you measure the urinary output and our IV fluid will be like this according to urinary outputs. And if the patient is normotensive, then only one IV fluid line or channel will be opened. No need of any fluid therapy.